Where There's Smoke, There's Fired is the 21st episode of the third season of Frasier. This is directed by Philip Charles MacKenzie, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in the episode. And it's a really good episode. I think it does a really great job of tackling addiction from different perspectives, and I'll talk more about that as we get there. It sounds like it's quite a serious, heavy topic, and in some ways it definitely is, but there's also a lot of lightness as well. It starts off with Niles on the phone to his bank trying to borrow $4,000. Then Ross comes over to Frasier's apartment, and we find out that there is a new owner of KSCL. This is a character called Wilfred S. Boone, who likes to be called Big Willy. And we are then very quickly down at KCL, and they're trying to find something in common with him. They're trying to get syndication, and Bulldog pulls a practical joke on Gail. It's nice to have the different characters involved. They're not in it extensively, but we do have them for a little bit. And then we get to meet Big Willy. He's played by Richard Hamilton, and he actually asks Frasier for his help. Now, when I say asks, I do mean demands. That he helps his fiancée stop smoking, and Frasier is happy to give this a go. He explains that addiction is different for everybody and it might not be easy, but basically he has no choice. And then I didn't remember this episode. I've seen it before, but I couldn't remember the specifics. And Bebe comes in. Frasier was actually waiting to hear from Bebe, so this is not that strange. And then after maybe less than a minute, we realise that Bebe is Big Willy's fiancée. Bit of a coincidence, but then the penny drops that it's Bebe Frasier needs to try and help quit smoking. And I think it's very clear that this is not going to be an easy task. We're then at Frasier's apartment where Bebe is there, and Niles comes over and he asks Bebe if he can ask her some questions for a paper he's working on addiction. And it's very clear that Bebe was very agitated to leave, and I think it's very clear why, because she wanted to smoke. And off she goes into the kitchen, and we the viewer can see her trying to have a cigarette, and Niles and Frasier are talking, and then Daphne and Martin come in from having walked Eddie. Eddie's not in this one very much, unfortunately, but we do get a little bit of Eddie, and I love their reaction when Frasier said that Bebe would be staying for a little bit because he's trying to help her quit smoking, and I just thought their response was fabulous. And then Bebe is about to leave, and we see the smoke coming from her handbag. I think the scene was beautifully executed, very well done. The bit where Bebe basically inhaled her bag was very powerful, I think, and it really helped to show that urgency that when a craving for an addiction happens, the need to settle that craving can be so dramatic like that. I think it worked very well. Obviously, it was done to be comedic and shocking, but I think it really helped to show that even though Bebe is trying, these cravings can be really, really powerful. We then have this scene around the dinner table. I think it was very well executed, where we have Martin, Daphne, Niles, Frasier, and Bebe, and they all start to talk about smoking, and Martin and Daphne talk about their own experiences with smoking, and Frasier, I think it was Frasier, asked Bebe directly, why do you like smoking? And I think this is quite an interesting perspective, because I guess there are two kinds of people with addictions. There are those who have an addiction and don't want to quit, and there are those with an addiction who do want to quit. And I think with smoking, I think there are going to be very different perspectives. With Bebe, she doesn't really want to quit, and she genuinely enjoys smoking, and she gives this speech about what it makes her feel and how it makes her feel, and I think it was very, very well written, really brilliant delivery. Slightly concerned that it could be quite triggering for anybody who, like Bebe, is trying to give up smoking, or indeed anybody who has quit smoking. I think that's something that's worth bearing in mind, that if you haven't seen this episode yet, and you are somebody who is trying to quit smoking, this could be triggering. And it maybe could be triggering for other types of addiction as well. So I think that that's maybe something where definitely there needs to be proceeding with caution. Now, I'm not a smoker. I've never smoked. I'm completely anti-smoking, so I don't really understand what she's going on about. If anybody is an ex-smoker or indeed a current smoker and you can relate to what she's saying, I'd be very keen to find out about that. As a non-smoker and as somebody who is very much against smoking, I find the speech very well written. but just mind-boggling because smoking is dirty and smelly and disgusting, and yet she feels this euphoria, and it's just so fascinating and very, very descriptive. We then cut to middle of the night, and Daphne, very much inspired by Bebe's speech, which is kind of the point I was making, is out on the balcony smoking. And Bebe ends up locking her out on the balcony. Not necessarily an action that makes sense. She locked her out on the balcony because she wouldn't give her a cigarette. But if she agreed to give her a cigarette, she'd have to open the door, and then Daphne could just come in the house and still not give her a cigarette. So I don't think there was much thought into that action, but nevertheless, it made for a relatively entertaining scene. I think it's also the first time I realised that there was a door to the balcony on the right-hand side. There's the main door that we often see, and then there's a door on the right as we head towards Daphne's bedroom, and I don't think I ever realised that before. We also find out that Martin was in the bathroom smoking, and the execution of the smoke billowing out of Martin's mouth the second Frasier opened the door was just perfectly done. Very, very well done. And I like the fact that Frasier did manage to give a speech that definitely helped to quell the situation. And it seems like maybe Bebe could tackle this head on. And then we cut to several weeks later, and it turns out that at the wedding, just before they got married, Big Willy died. And that is devastating, but Bebe seems to be more devastated about the fact that he clearly had a lot of money, and she was seconds away from marrying him. And I'm assuming there's not a prenup involved. And then if he died just after, she would have got his money. But granted, I think it might have looked suspicious. I'm sure it happens. I'm sure there are people who are happily in love and nobody is interested in the other person's money. And unfortunately, they die soon after the wedding. But I've watched enough true crime and read enough true crime to know that that does look suspicious, even though it not always is. And there was a line from Frasier, I think it was from Frasier, who was explaining what was happening and how Bebe had apparently grabbed onto the skin of Big Willy's neck to try and make his face move as if he was able to say I do, to obviously try and seal the marriage so that she could of course get financial benefit. And it was not a bad way to end things. We actually end with Gil and his newfound love of Texan food, I believe, with his little cowboy hat on. It was a nice light-hearted way to end things, but I think it does a really good job of highlighting addiction, the different sides of addiction, and indeed different attitudes towards smoking. As I said, as a non-smoker, I can't understand why anybody would enjoy it. I can understand why people are addicted to it, absolutely, but I can't understand why anybody would want to continue smoking. But I guess I can't understand why anybody would begin smoking in the first place. So for me, it's definitely, probably, presumably, a very different experience. If you're watching this as a smoker or an ex-smoker, I'd love to know what you think of the episode. Was it relatable? Did you understand Bebe and what she was saying? And anybody who has addiction, I think, can feel some kind of comfort in this, that it is hard. It is difficult. And I think Frasier in particular did a really good job of making that clear, that even though he's willing to help Bebe, he doesn't expect miracles overnight, and that it is challenging. And I think that that's something that's really, really appreciated in this episode. I think they did a really good job with it. Definitely an unpredictable episode. I don't think anybody could have predicted that outcome at the wedding. And ultimately, where there's smoke, there's fire is definitely a really enjoyable episode with some really important points.